Monday morning, 7:14 sharp. Warden Robert Neal tore open a manila envelope with no return address on his desk. The first thing that slid out was a photocopy of Block C internal log with red markers circling one entry. That entry read, "Cameras 7 through 12 technical malfunction from 10 at night until 2 in the morning every single Friday." The same exact entry repeated itself every single Friday without exception for 5 consecutive years running in that facility. Behind that page sat 11 more sheets carrying the voices of 9 women nobody in this system ever listened to. Every one of those voices was collected by a single convicted violent offender, a repeat felon who could barely write her name. She had exactly 72 hours to pull it off before the man she was exposing discovered everything she did. Now, I need you to sit with that for a moment and ask yourself, what would you actually do inside those walls? If this story shakes something loose inside your chest, then subscribe and tell me in the comments who deserves freedom here. To understand how that envelope reached that desk, we need to go back exactly 72 hours to a Friday night. Block C of Macon County Women's Correctional Facility sat under buzzing fluorescent lights that never fully turned off at night. The facility was packed at 140% capacity with women sleeping on mattresses laid directly on concrete floors everywhere. Most of them were there for unpaid fines or missed court dates or petty drug charges that spiraled out of control fast. The hallway of Block C smelled like industrial chlorine mixed with sweat and something sour that never washed out completely. At 10:15 that Friday night, the cameras in that corridor clicked off, just like they did every single Friday before. The women in their cells heard the familiar electronic hum die, and they knew exactly what that silence meant going forward. Some turned to face their walls and pulled thin blankets over their heads because knowing was worse than not knowing. And into that silence walked Corrections Officer Dwayne Crawford, 17 years on the job, keys jangling against extra handcuffs on belt. Crawford stopped in front of cell 47 where Marisa Delgado sat on her bunk, clutching her knees to her chest tight. Marisa was 29 years old, a single mother who owed the state of Georgia $600 in unpaid fines total. She had missed 3 court hearings because she could not find anyone to watch her 4-year-old son named Mateo. 90 days they gave her for that, and she was only on night 3 inside this place, serving her time quietly. Crawford told her to step out for a random narcotics search, and his voice carried no urgency, just flat routine authority. She stepped into the corridor, and he told her to remove her clothing right there under the fluorescent lights for everyone. 20 women watched from behind their cell doors as Marisa stood naked, trembling with her arms crossed over her chest desperately. Crawford keyed his radio and described her body to his partner Travis Holt on the other end, laughing between transmissions casually. Now the fluorescent tube above Marisa's head flickered once, like even the light was trying to look away from what happened. 6 cells down from where Marisa stood, a pair of hands gripped the steel bars until every knuckle turned white completely. Those hands belonged to D.D. Washington, 54 years old, 7 years into a 10-year sentence for aggravated assault. She had a scar running from her left temple to her jaw from a knife fight in Fulton County back in 2016. Her reading glasses hung on a string around her neck, and they were the only decoration she had ever allowed herself. Dee watched Crawford laugh, and she watched Marisa shake, and something behind her ribs shifted like tectonic plates grinding. She did not scream or curse or rattle the bars because she had learned long ago that noise changes absolutely nothing. Or instead, she memorized every detail, the time the camera log entry, the position of every witness standing behind every door watching. Her diabetic hands trembled not from sugar, but from a rage so compressed it could have cracked the concrete beneath her feet. By the time Crawford told Marisa to get dressed and return to his station, Dee had already begun building something. Most people hear the word prison and imagine violence as loud, explosive chaos. But the real violence here is administrative and quiet. The system at Macon County was designed so that any complaint from an inmate about an officer passed through the officers themselves. The Georgia Correctional Officers Union had not allowed a single sexual abuse complaint to result in termination in 5 full years. Crawford knew this, and that knowledge was the source of every ounce of his power over these women in here. He was not a monster in the way movies show monsters with dark music and obvious evil written on their faces. He was a 44-year-old former Marine who believed that absolute authority over discarded people was simply a job benefit. His partner, Travis Holt, was 26 and owed his position entirely to Crawford, who got him hired through union connections. Holt never touched anyone himself, but he watched and he laughed and he turned his back at exactly the right moments. Together, they had turned Block C into a kingdom where Friday nights belonged to Crawford, and silence was the only surviving currency. To Saturday morning, D.D. Washington sat in the cafeteria, pushing powdered eggs around her tray and watching the room like a general. She needed 9 women to speak about the worst thing that ever happened to them and sign their real names. She needed a legal document written by someone who understood federal law, and she herself could barely spell the word federal. She needed a courier, someone leaving the facility within 72 hours, who could carry an envelope past the exit search procedure. And she needed all of this to happen without Crawford noticing, because if he caught even a whisper, everything would collapse. The first woman she approached was Linda Carey, who had been in Block C for 2 years, and everyone knew Crawford visited her. Linda looked at Dee with eyes that were already dead and said no, and turned back to her food without another word. The second woman said no before Dee even finished her sentence, because fear had already answered for her long ago automatically. Then Dee sat down next to Lorraine Baxter, a 38-year-old woman from Appalachia with ruined teeth and empty, hollow eyes. Lorraine did not say no, and she did not say yes either, because for 40 seconds she just stared at the table. Then she opened her mouth, and what came out was not a word, but a sound like air escaping from something that had been sealed. She told Dee about the laundry room 3 years ago, about Crawford locking the door, about the sound of industrial dryers. She told her about the smell of bleach and hot cotton, and how she still cannot fold a towel without her hands shaking. Dee listened without moving, without blinking, without breathing louder than she absolutely had to in that moment right there. When Lorraine finished, she looked up, and her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set like concrete hardening in real time. That was 1 voice out of 9, and Dee had less than 48 hours remaining to collect the other 8. She stood up from the table and felt a shadow fall across her back, heavy and deliberate, and smelling like cheap department cologne. Crawford leaned close enough that she could feel his breath on her ear and said, "Dee, you planning something special?" Dee looked straight at Crawford and let 3 full seconds of silence hang between them like a blade. And then she smiled, the kind of smile that costs nothing and reveals even less to anyone watching closely nearby. Planning a prayer circle, officer, because some of us need Jesus more than others do around this place lately. Crawford studied her face the way a dog studies a closed hand, not sure if it holds food or a fist. He grunted something that was not quite a word and walked away, but his eyes stayed on her back, burning. That exchange cost Dee something she could not afford to lose, because now Crawford had her scent in his nose. Every minute from this point forward carried a weight that pressed against her chest like concrete blocks stacking up. She had 6 more women to convince, and a man with 17 years of predator instincts now watching her movements closely. The powdered eggs on her tray had gone cold, but her blood was running hotter than it had in 7 years inside. She found the next 3 women during Saturday yard time pressed against the chain-link fence where guards rarely walked. Each conversation lasted less than 4 minutes, because anything longer would draw eyes that reported back to Crawford automatically. A woman named Patricia Goines said yes immediately, then grabbed DD's wrist and whispered he did it to me twice. Another named Yolanda Freeman nodded once without speaking, and that nod contained 5 years of swallowed screaming inside her throat. The fifth woman was a 23-year-old named Destiny Banks, who started crying before DD even said Crawford's name aloud. But the sixth woman, a lifer named Rosa Gutierrez, said something that almost broke the entire operation apart right there. She said Crawford has a second list of women he rotates through in Block A on Wednesday nights, not just Fridays. DD felt the ground shift beneath her feet, because this thing was twice as large as she originally calculated it. 9 voices might not be enough, but 9 voices were all she had time to collect before Friday's courier walked free. Saturday night, DD lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling while her blood sugar dropped to dangerous levels fast. Her hands were shaking and her vision blurred at the edges, and she could taste metal on the back of her tongue. She had a small stash of commissary candy bars hidden inside her pillowcase for exactly these diabetic emergency moments in here. She ate 2 and waited for the sugar to hit her bloodstream while counting the ceiling tiles above her head slowly. 47 tiles from wall to wall, and she had counted them every single night for 7 years without missing. But tonight the counting did not calm her down, because tomorrow she had to do the hardest part of this plan. She needed Tamara Jefferson, the only woman in Block C with a college degree and legal knowledge, to help her. Tamara was filing for early release in 2 months and had every reason in the world to say no, absolutely not. What DD was asking could destroy Tamara's freedom, and she knew that truth sat heavy as a stone in water. Sunday morning, DD walked to Tamara's cell and stood in the doorway without saying a single word for 30 seconds. Tamara looked up from her legal pad, and her eyes said everything her mouth did not need to say right then. "I know why you are here, and the answer is no, because I have 53 days until my hearing date arrives." DD nodded slowly and turned to leave, because she had learned that pushing people past their limit breaks them permanently. She walked back through the corridor and past the shower room where the door stood open and steam drifted out. What she saw through that steam changed everything, because Tamara was not the only one walking this corridor right now. Marisa Delgado stood under the running water, fully clothed with her prison uniform soaked through and her eyes open, seeing nothing. The water hit her face and ran down her body, and she did not move or blink or breathe in any visible way. DD stopped walking, and something inside her chest cracked open like a door that had been welded shut for years. 3 hours later, at 2:17 in the morning, Tamara Jefferson knocked on DD's cell door with her knuckles. She did not explain what changed her mind, and DD did not ask, because some decisions explain themselves through action. They walked together to the prison library, which stayed unlocked for GED test preparation sessions on weekends until 4 morning. Tamara read through the raw testimonies that DD had collected on scraps of commissary paper and napkins and margins. Her face changed with each page, shifting from professional detachment to something raw and more dangerous underneath her composure entirely. She pulled a reference copy of the Prison Rape Elimination Act from the legal shelf and opened it to Section 4. For the next 90 minutes, she transformed 9 broken stories into a structured federal complaint with statute citations and specific dates. DD watched her write and felt something she had not felt since before prison, something warm and terrifying called hope. But hope in this place is a luxury that always comes with a price tag attached, and the bill was coming soon. Monday morning before dawn, DD carried the finished document, 11 pages folded inside a Bible she had owned for 7 years. She found Marisa sitting on her bunk, and what happened next became the emotional center of this entire 72 hours. Marisa read the document, and her hands began shaking so hard the pages rattled like leaves in a storm outside. She looked at DD and said, "They will add time to my sentence, and I will never see Mateo grow up." The words hit DD harder than any fist, because she knew exactly what it meant to lose a child slowly. She sat down next to Marisa and told her about Keisha, her daughter who stopped visiting 2 years ago without explanation. "I am not asking you to be brave, Marisa, because brave is a word for people who have choices in their lives. I am asking you to let me be brave instead of you, because I have nothing left to lose except this moment." Marisa stared at the wall for 11 seconds and then picked up the pen and signed her name with a hand still trembling. Once the document was complete with 9 signatures, and DD sealed it inside the back cover of that Bible with commissary tape, Cheryl Moss was scheduled for release at 600 hours, and she was the only person walking out of this facility today. DD gave Cheryl the Bible and $200 transferred to her commissary account, which was every cent she had. Cheryl took it with the expression of someone making a transaction, not a moral choice, because that is who she was. But something else was happening inside this building that DD did not know about yet, and it changed the math completely. Crawford had asked a trustee named Vanessa Cole why DD visited the library at 2 in the morning on Sunday. Vanessa told him she was studying for her GED test, and Crawford accepted that answer, but his eyes said otherwise clearly. Until the clock now read 4:52 in the morning, and Cheryl's release processing would begin in exactly 68 minutes from now. DD sat on her bunk holding her reading glasses in both hands and realized she had done everything she could possibly do. At 5:52, the release processing office opened its steel door, and Cheryl Moss stepped forward carrying everything she owned. That everything fit inside a single clear plastic bag and one Bible with a secret worth more than her entire life. The processing officer was a woman named Deborah Kinney, who had worked intake and release for 11 years without caring once. She checked Cheryl's identification against the release order and stamped 3 forms with mechanical indifference that morning at her desk. And then came the part that made DD's heart stop 600 feet away in her cell on that bunk. Deborah told Cheryl to place all personal items on the counter for a standard exit inspection of her belongings right now. The Bible landed on that counter with a sound that echoed through DD's imagination like a gunshot fired in church. Deborah picked it up and opened the front cover and flipped through the first 30 pages with her thumb moving slowly. She was looking for contraband tucked between pages, but the envelope was taped flat against the back cover, hidden. Deborah's thumb stopped on a page in Psalms where Cheryl had underlined a verse about deliverance from enemies in blue ink. She looked at Cheryl's face and saw nothing, because Cheryl had spent 26 years perfecting the art of blankness. The officer closed the Bible and placed it back in the plastic bag without ever reaching the back cover at all. Cheryl's lungs filled with air for what felt like the first time in 3 days since she agreed to this thing. She signed her release paperwork and walked through 2 sets of steel doors that buzzed open one after another ahead. The morning air hit her face at 6:11, and it smelled like Georgia pine and red clay, and something she forgot existed. Freedom tasted different when you were carrying someone else's suffering in a bag alongside your own dirty clothes from inside. She stood on the parking lot asphalt and looked at the Bible, and then looked at the road stretching east toward town. But this is where the story splits into 2 paths, and only one of them leads where you think it does. Cheryl had $200 on a commissary card that could be converted to cash at any convenience store in town. The road east led to her cousin's trailer, where a bed and a cigarette and absolute silence about this envelope waited for her. Nobody would ever know, because the 9 women inside those walls had no phones, no internet, no way to reach her out here. She could throw the Bible in a ditch and walk away, and the only consequence would be a clear conscience slowly rotting. That calculation ran through her head in approximately 4 seconds, because Cheryl was nothing if not efficient at self-preservation always. She pulled the Bible from the bag and held it in both hands, and felt the weight of 11 pages pressing against cardboard. And then she saw something that was not there, which is the kind of thing that only happens when guilt becomes a hallucination. She saw Marisa standing under fluorescent light, with her arms crossed over her chest and her whole body trembling violently, shaking. Cheryl turned around and walked back toward the facility entrance, because some debts cannot be paid with commissary money, ever. The front desk officer looked confused when Cheryl asked to speak with Warden Robert Neal directly and personally right now. Released inmates do not request meetings with wardens because released inmates run from this building like it is burning down fast. Cheryl placed the Bible on the counter and said, "This contains documented evidence of repeated sexual abuse by corrections staff." The officer's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds, and none of them were helpful or reassuring to see. He picked up his desk phone and dialed the administrative wing and spoke in a voice too low for Cheryl to hear. 12 minutes later, a woman in a gray suit appeared and escorted Cheryl to a conference room with no cameras and 1 window. Cheryl handed over the Bible and said, "Everything you need is taped inside the back cover of this book right here." The woman in gray opened the back cover and peeled the envelope free and looked at Cheryl with an expression that asked everything. Cheryl said 9 women are waiting for someone to believe them, and then she walked out the front door for good. The envelope sat on Warden Neal's desk for 23 minutes before he touched it because his morning involved budget reports. But when he finally opened it, the first page was the camera log photocopy with red circles that screamed, "Pattern not malfunction." The second page was Tamara Jefferson's legal summary, citing the Prison Rape Elimination Act sections 3 and 4 with precision. Pages 3 through 11 were the testimonies, and each one read like a wound that had been cleaned and stitched by hand. Lorraine Baxter described the laundry room in language so specific that Neal could smell the bleach through the paper itself. Patricia Goines provided dates that matched the camera outage log with accuracy that no fabrication could ever reproduce convincingly at all. Neal's coffee sat untouched for 47 minutes while he read and his secretary knocked twice and got no answer back, where he picked up his phone and called the county prosecutor's office instead of calling the corrections officers' union first today. That single decision to skip the union call was the first crack in a wall that had protected men like Crawford for decades. Back inside Block C, the women who signed those pages went through Monday morning like soldiers waiting for a bomb to land. Dee Dee sat in the cafeteria and ate her powdered eggs and watched Crawford patrol the room with his usual swagger intact. He did not know yet, and that ignorance was the only shield standing between these 9 women and absolute catastrophe right now. Tamara Jefferson kept her eyes on her legal pad and wrote fake GED notes, while her pulse hammered inside her wrists hard. Lorraine Baxter folded laundry in the facility basement, and her hands shook, but she folded every towel perfectly without stopping once. Marisa Delgado sat on her bunk and held a photograph of Mateo and whispered something only she could hear clearly. Crawford walked past Dee Dee's table at 8:45 and looked at her the way a cat looks at a closed door. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any threat he could have spoken with his mouth open wide today. By 9:15 that Monday morning, the county prosecutor had already assigned 2 investigators to begin pulling camera maintenance records immediately. Crawford was pulled from his shift at 11:40 that Monday morning and told to report to administrative offices for a meeting. He walked down the corridor with his keys still jangling and his extra handcuffs still swinging on his belt without concern. He did not know that 2 investigators were already sitting in that room with copies of every testimony page spread out. He did not know that Travis Holt had received a separate phone call offering immunity in exchange for full cooperation. The door closed behind Crawford at 11:47, and it would never open the same way for him again ever. 600 feet away in Block C, a fluorescent light buzzed above cell 47, where Marissa once stood trembling naked. Dee Dee heard the buzz and looked up from her book, and something shifted behind her ribs, like a lock finally turning. She did not smile because victory inside these walls always comes wrapped in barbed wire and stamped with conditions attached. But her hands stopped trembling for the first time in 72 hours. And that stillness was enough for now today.